In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey, welcome to the Abracast. I'm John. Yeah, welcome. I'm John. This is our Wednesday book club. As you know, we've been reading through and discussing Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra. So I'm going to try to get caught up with the lessons episodes. We're going to do another one of the lessons episodes tonight. So we're going to get right into it. But yeah, so hold on. Before I get right into it, the Fulgor Correspondentia, which is the mailing list, it's the all the stuff that you get for getting onto the mailing list. This month we're getting Kama Sutra art from our Kama Sutra episode. We're continuing Genesis. So I put together a brief Genesis timeline to get us current, because we've been, talking about Genesis since the beginning of the podcast. And then we're also wrapping up, I think we're wrapping up the Solomon episodes, which again has been a long time coming. So I have the Goetia worksheet is back on there. Yeah, it's fun. It's like you choose you make sure you're like in the right hour. You make sure you're in the right day, away from the from the new moon. There's a little place that you could draw the sigil of the demon that you're summoning. And it's got the checklist of everything that you need to do. So it's fun. That's still up there. There's also a new degree. We're introducing a new degree called the Degree of the Red Archive. So I'm going to be going through and archiving shows incrementally as I go. So old shows are going to be archived. And if you go to Patreon or Subscribestar, and I think it's set up for $1, the Degree of the Red Archive, you'll have access to all those shows as they get archived there. You're not going to be able to get them on wherever you get your podcast from. Those are going to be the only places that you're going to be able to find those old episodes. So if you're catching up, you might want to hurry. And if you don't hurry, then there's hope for you. You can just join the Degree of the Red Archive. The graphic is pretty cool for that degree as well. And just to add a little bit more to the different degrees, so I'm adding a new perk for the Vessel of the Art degree, which is the $10 one. So for all the stuff that you get for the $10 one, I'm also throwing in a monthly Skype call with me. We don't have to talk about conspiracies or occult. You want to talk about comic books? We could talk about comic books. You want to talk about 90s era attitude wrestling? I can fucking do that. Anything that you want to talk about, we can talk about. Literally, it's your dime. So monthly Skype call with me, your host, John Towers. Right there, I'm adding that in. It should be added into the platforms already, but if it's not, it's coming. So, if you're considering supporting the show, that might be something that you're interested in. So if you are playing along at home, this is the time that I want you to summon your Vessel of the Art, and I want you to adhere to the formula for your weapon of mass distraction, and raise your glass to the air, raise your vessel to the air, and say thank you to all of my Patreon and Subscribe-Star supporters. Thank you very much. You brave. So with all these Lessons of Zarathustra episodes that we've been doing, so we read the book, right? I read the book out. And then people ask, well, what does this mean? Like, what does this have to do with becoming the Overman? And I point out that that's what the Lessons of Zarathustra episodes are all about. So what I did is I went speech by speech, and I went and I found 3 sources that comment on the substance of the speech. I went to Sparknotes, and then I found an existentialism paper about Thus Spake Zarathustra, and then a website called Grade Saver. It's actually geared towards education, but I feel like it does add. So I'm just going to go through and we're going to be discussing these speeches from these 3 different points of view: the Sparknotes summary, the existentialism paper, and the Grade Saver paper, or the Grade Saver website. So as I'm going through, I try not to call it out because I think it gums up the flow of the flow of the content, I guess. But I catch myself saying it over and over again. So I probably will continue doing that. That's the pattern that I've noticed that emerges. So let's get into it. All right, so I didn't spend a whole lot of time bullshitting. Yeah, so let's get into this thing. We're picking up this episode with the dancing song speech. Zarathustra sings a song to dancing girls about life and wisdom. Both are women, always changing and always seductive, and so similar to one another that one loves one because of the other, and makes them both jealous as a result. And after his song, evening falls, and Zarathustra becomes sad, feeling unable to justify his being alive. The dance song, Zarathustra attempts to overcome the spirit of gravity with a dancing song. Yet, in the song, Zarathustra's soul sinks into an unfathomable. When he looks into his life's eyes, Zarathustra is not yet ready to look into life's eyes without being overcome by the spirit of gravity. Zarathustra is walking through the woods looking for a well when he comes upon a green field where he finds several girls dancing together. When they see Zarathustra, they immediately stop dancing, but he tells them not to stop. He tells them that though they see him in the darkness and fear, there's actually love in him and his teaching. To prove that he is not there to spoil their fun, he begins to sing them a song to which they can dance, a song with love in it. The song is a playful conversation on a fishing trip between Zarathustra and an anthropomorphized character named Life. Life mocks Zarathustra for his teaching, saying that even if he cannot understand life, she is not incomprehensible. Zarathustra is simply not sharp enough to comprehend her. There is a comparison here between the wisdom that Zarathustra has been both proclaiming and battling in life that he believes he cannot fathom. Life says that she can be fathomed only if Zarathustra does away with the necessities of wisdom that he seeks. Zarathustra sees himself as being caught in a lover's triangle with wisdom and life, both calling him to abandon the other. This will lead Zarathustra to great revelation, the will to power. In part 3, Life knows that Zarathustra loves her more than he loves wisdom. But he is afraid to tell her, and Zarathustra praises wisdom. But she turns his praise on its head, suggesting that when Zarathustra praises his wisdom, he is really praising life. It is clear that life favors Zarathustra, though, and we are unsure at this point whether she has given her secret to him. As the song closes, Zarathustra becomes sad and the sun has set, signaling the setting of Zarathustra's wisdom as well. And he is confused about what it is that he has been seeking. He tries apologizing to his disciples, but he has no answers for them. "Forgive me my sadness," he tells them. "Evening came. Forgive me that evening came." This signals a great confusion in Zarathustra's thought. The Tomb Song. We're moving to the next speech. Zarathustra thinks back on his youth and the ideas and ideals he held then, and all that remains unchanged from this time is his will, which has helped him to overcome his losses and strive ever forward. The grave song, Zarathustra laments what is buried in tombs, the visions of his youth. All being shall be divine to me, and all days shall be holy to me. Zarathustra's soul is drawn down by the spirit of gravity, wounded by nausea, the disgust with life. His highest hope, the overman, remains locked up in the tomb. Now Zarathustra will speak of what enables the soul to rise out of such tombs. The grave song is the last of Zarathustra's songs. This song, like the first song, is a song of solitude. The graves of which Zarathustra speak are the graves of his past, parts of him that have died and lay out of his reach. As the song begins, Zarathustra decides to sail to these graves. The first part of the song, Zarathustra's lament for his lost visions of his youth. I'm going to toast to that. I'm going to drink to that. He believes that these visions have been disloyal to him and have abandoned him. And then he realizes that in actuality they have been murdered by his enemies. His youthful visions experience the death that was meant for him. The second part of the song is a curse to his enemies. Zarathustra condemns his enemies for stealing and killing his visions of eternity and the overman. He recounts that all of these things he used to believe, explaining how all these ideas have been murdered. Although he realizes that he is no longer able to dance beyond all heavens, he resolves to dance again and to resurrect his hope. The final part of the song is Zarathustra's resolution to regain these visions, even though they have been taken from him by his enemies. And he decides that he will no longer despair. Instead, through sheer force of will, will regain those visions. Zarathustra realizes that there is something invulnerable, unburiable in me, something that explodes boulders. It is called my will. It's like a fucking Pantera song. This song is an important turning point for Zarathustra. In it, the reader learns about his past, therefore his first period of solitude. The reader learns that Zarathustra once had youthful visions, but they were killed in him by the teachings of Christianity and modern society. Though those visions no longer exist, Zarathustra has made an important discovery: his will to power. What is this will to power? And what it means will be explored through the rest of the book. This next speech is on self-overcoming. Zarathustra claims that everything that lives obeys, and if you cannot obey yourself, someone else will command you. Commanding is more difficult and dangerous than obeying, but we are all driven to it by our fundamental will to power. The powerful obey themselves and command others. Those who are commanded submit so that they may command those who are even weaker. Because power can only be gained through obedience. Life always seeks to submit, change, and overcome itself. As a result, life is characterized by change. Nothing, not truth, not morality, not God, is permanent or absolute. If the main point of Zarathustra's teaching concerns the transformation or the self-overcoming of humanity, then the title of this section indicates its importance. The value of the past are not the results of the will to truth, but rather of the will to power. In other words, the values of a people are not something that is passively discovered, but rather something that is the creative product of a people. This speech is one of the most decisive speeches in the book on self-overcoming. It is the fruition of Zarathustra's idea in the second part of the novel. The speech is the conversation between Zarathustra and the wisest ones, the great thinkers and philosophers from throughout the ages. In the speech, Zarathustra shows how the philosopher's ultimate goal include a will to power. Through the philosopher's claims to seek truth and actually create the truth from those under them, the wisest ones have been creating a moral world where they can make to kneel before them. They create this world for those under them with their conceptions of what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is evil. Zarathustra shows how the philosophers have actually become the moral kings of the ages. All notions of right and wrong are based upon their work, he reasons, and this makes them very powerful. Zarathustra congratulates these men instead of challenging them. He acknowledges their greatness and their power. But at the same time, he prepares a way to overcome their rule. This is like when Tony Soprano lets Junior be the head mob dude in New Jersey, but he's just like, I'm going to just do whatever I want to do anyways. But you can think that you're the boss. Zarathustra offers his views on humanity. The weak serve the strong, and the weak are served by those who are even weaker than they are. Zarathustra says that will to power is the pursuit of life. For the sake of power, life risks life itself. Life's ultimate goal is not simply to stay alive. Life's ultimate goal is a will to power, a desire to be a master over other life. This, Zarathustra says, is the fundamental state of life. It is the reason that Zarathustra will be able to will himself to rise over the great philosophers of the ages. Zarathustra closes his speech by asking those around him to tell others about this will to power. A weakness of the old philosophers is that they kept their will to power to themselves. If others know of this true meaning of life, however, much will change in humanity and society. The old foundations of the world, Christianity and the modern morality of the age will crumble under the realization of the will to power. I need to lube up after that. Moving on to this speech, it's called On Those Who Are Sublime. Not the band, though. Is it a band? It seems like a shitty 90s band, Sublime. The solemn, sublime seeker of truth is noble in his pursuit. But he still needs to learn about beauty and laughter, and to practice graciousness and kindness. Zarathustra values lightness and kindness in a powerful person because such a person is also capable of solemnity and cruelty. There is no virtue in being kind simply because one hasn't the power to be cruel. On those who are sublime, Zarathustra criticizes the aesthetics of the spirit. Some claim that there is no disputing over taste, but Zarathustra claims that all life is a dispute over taste and tasting. On the sublime ones, having been discovered the will to power and having briefly shown the kind of world to which a discovery will lead, Zarathustra turns his attention to the modern institutions of knowledge and their deconstruction in the face of this will to power. He turns first to the sublime, modern seekers of knowledge. He uses the imagery of storms and serenity to show how these modern wise men have been able to free themselves from the old superstitions of Christianity. But many have been able to gain the serenity that Zarathustra has been able to gain. The sublime seeker of knowledge has not yet learned laughing and beauty, and Zarathustra says that the sublime one's difficulty is not being able to find beauty without willing it through violence. To stand with muscles reflexed in an unharnessed will. This is the most difficult, Zarathustra says. Zarathustra's problem with these modern thinkers and philosophers is that they have not learned the secret of finding beauty as the early Greek philosophers did, though these modern thinkers have been sublime because they have attained knowledge. They have not been able to overcome sublimity to gain even greater state. They have not mastered the ability to control and restrain their will. You know, this reminds me of Liber 2. Crowley's Liber 2, which is the message from the master Therion, where Crowley's tied into this Nietzsche Overman thing. He said that Nietzsche was a prophet of Thelema. And, in a way, all this stuff can be seen in a Thelemic light for sure. But Master Therion says that do what thou wilt, Thelema says, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. Master Therion says that do what thou wilt does not mean do whatever you want. I always think it's like the difference between like a toddler and a soldier. A toddler, do what thou wilt for a toddler would just be like, blah, anarchy, right? It's just crazy. But for a soldier, do what thou wilt is a different meaning, because it's like there's like a level of temperament there. It's kind of a Kabbalistic idea. It's like this idea that using your will and your mind to focus your will, for a Kabbalist, it would be, you would see it as using the different Sephiroths as a filter between like justice and mercy, and like all of these Sephiroths on the tree of life, filtering it through the Gabora and all of this stuff. But in this way, you use the mind to focus your will onto doing your will, not just doing what you want to do. I have a lot to say about this, I guess. Moving on. Somebody reached out to me once and was like, hey, we're going to be doing an episode on Crowley. Would you come on to kind of be like this, talk about Crowley? And I'm like, I can't really talk about Crowley. That's not what we do here. We don't talk about the stories of these characters. We talk about their work and what they wrote. But I was like, but I can talk about Thelema. I can talk about the Ordo Templi Orientis and all of this will business. I could talk about all that. And they were like, oh, great. Like the angle that we have is kind of like Crowley is like, he's a petulant child that just does whatever he wants. And I'm like, well, if that's your angle, we're going to have a small problem, because that's not the way that I see it. I subsequently did not get, messaged back to be on the podcast. The podcast is great. I love it. And actually, to be in all fairness, I don't think they ever actually did the Crowley podcast. So maybe it's still in the works. I don't know. Full disclosure. You know what I'm saying? On the land of education, modern people accumulate the learning of all past ages and parade this knowledge as their own. They take pride in skepticism. Oh, I'm going to drink to that. In being free from faith in superstition. I'm actually going to drink to that too. But this is only because they themselves are empty and have created nothing of their own. I will not drink to that. I'm not empty, and I've created plenty of stuff. On the land of culture, Zarathustra addresses contemporary education, and he mocks those who pretend to be completely objective in their knowledge. And on the land of education, the next three speeches of Zarathustra gives outlines of the best parts of the modern world, while highlighting the weakness of modern philosophers. After flying through the future and the past, Zarathustra returns to the present to speak to those concerned with modern liberal education. That's a small L. This is not a political discussion. These men believe that they are masters of the present because they have mastered the past. Zarathustra shows them how, even though they mask themselves in the knowledge of the cultures of the past, they do not possess the true knowledge that Zarathustra himself possesses. They claim that they have no beliefs or superstitions, and Zarathustra shows them that they lack belief only because they are sterile. They do not have knowledge that Zarathustra has to show that they are sterile. Zarathustra tells the myth of the dead Greek mythology and the story from Adam, from Genesis, and the people's beliefs have been taken from them like the rib of Adam's side, yet this has left them thin and frail like the dead. Zarathustra wants nothing to do with them because their knowledge does not lead to the ultimate goal of the Overman.
On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode,
to hear the names of white men and others who, it was said, had also met or seen these creatures. She went after these persons too and found out that in due course that it was so, and they in turn had not been saying anything for fear of ridicule. I withhold their names too, as I do not have permission of any to publish them. Said human kids on reaching the age of reason turned out not to want to talk about this abomination, while their parents were most definitely did not and do not want to talk about it. Nonetheless, they have talked a bit, and I pass it on to you for what it is worth. We've made 5 investigation trips and have, for evidence, a fingerprint lifted off a house window, including a plaster cast of a footprint, personal taped accounts of the creature, plus many interviews. This includes photographs. He is 7 feet tall, 400 pounds. That's a big motherfucker. Can move at tremendous speeds, jump tremendous distances. No news items concerning this being have been printed in the Portland papers. He displays extreme cunning, walks and runs. Whoa, this is personal. He displays extreme cunning. He walks and runs erect. Appears frustrated. Acts as if he would like to communicate. He makes extremely high-pitched sounds. But if you want to stay till afterwards, I'll tell you I've never talked about this. I told my wife about it last night at a campfire while I was deciding what I was going to do with this episode. So I've never told any very literally a fraction, like maybe 3 other human beings, this story. But I'll tell you my fucking Bigfoot story if you hang on after this.
support the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com. Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content and access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that, plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
Members of the degree of the Fulgar Correspondentia, alert. Please hang on until the end of this episode for a very important, if not urgent, message about the future and the state of the mailing list. On Immaculate Perception, Zarathustra criticizes contemplative people who claim that they merely want to perceive the world without interfering with it. He says that they feel guilty imposing themselves upon the world, and so they repress their will to create, and they want to reflect like the moon rather than radiate like the sun. Beauty is not a thing one views from afar. Beauty is where the acts of the willing and creating are at their strongest. Here is an interesting contrast drawn between the metaphors of the moon and the sun. Whereas the sun continually gives its light, the moon only reflects the light from the sun. The moon is completely passive, like Plato thought the soul is when turned away from the senses and contemplates true reality. On the Immaculate Perception, in this speech, Zarathustra confronts the practitioners of modern science and philosophy, those whose ultimate goal is to achieve a pure perspective, a completely objective state of mind. Zarathustra uses the parable of the moon to make his point. The moon, long a symbol of the feminine, is more like a barren, impotent man. The moon is a symbol of the modern philosopher who believes he can achieve pure objectivity. Such a man cannot produce offspring, and Zarathustra suggests that instead of the moon will be overcome by the brightness of the sun and the symbol of the new age of the overman. Zarathustra ridicules those who strive for pure objectivity, for being content in viewing with a dead will, without the grasp and greed of selfishness. This contentment in viewing will not lead to the overman. Zarathustra says, because whomever cannot believe himself always lies. Pure objectivity is one illusion, because no matter what, each person will bring a particular perspective to what he sees. The goal is to believe in the individual. Zarathustra says that he himself was once like this before, and he saw a truer light, the knowledge of the will to power and the fulfillment of the overman. This light is like a sun that will eclipse the moon. That is the myth of objective knowledge. Here we go. We're going to get into a good one. I remember this one real good. Zarathustra is going to rail on the topic of scholars. Zarathustra criticizes scholars for being uncreative and petty, accumulating knowledge as if it were an amusing pastime. Zarathustra further marks his departure from traditional scholars. On Scholars begins with Zarathustra relating an incident in which he is asleep under a tree when a sheep comes and nibbles on the ivy wreath on Zarathustra's head. The sheep realizes that Zarathustra is no longer a scholar, and it walks away, and this parable is a symbol for the scholarly community that Zarathustra sees as a group of sheep who blindly and dumbly follows others. Zarathustra is proud that he is no longer a scholar in the old way. I will drink to that. Instead, he says he is still a scholar to the children and also to the thistles and the red poppies. Zarathustra begins to list the problems with the modern scholars. Zarathustra used to be a part of their group, but now he has found a simpler way to be. He no longer needs to approach complex, useless ideas with poison as the scholars do. Their work, Zarathustra says, is useless because it only makes a modest noise. These scholars now hold a grudge against Zarathustra and try to silence him, but he will not be silenced. He will stroll with his thoughts over their heads. These scholars cannot stop Zarathustra in his quest. This speech does not address the scholars directly. It only describes them. Zarathustra claims that modern scholarship serves other powers such as democracy. Therefore, scholarship discounts men like Zarathustra as freaks too lowly for proper consideration. Zarathustra ridicules these scholars for not heeding his call regarding the overman and not understanding his notion of justice. Zarathustra says that human beings are not equal. Scholars are not permitted to want the overman as Zarathustra does because they have been subjugated by the ideals of modern democracy. So I have a lot to say right here. I have a lot to say, and I'm running out of gin and running short on time, so let's do it. So there's a lot of knee-jerky stuff in that last bit. You know, people are going to hear that Zarathustra declaring that not all men are, not all human beings are equal. They're going to hear that and get a knee-jerk reaction, but I think, I'm not a Nietzschean scholar, but I think that he's not talking about race. You know what I mean? Like, he's not talking about race, or he's not talking about class. He's not talking about what your income is. You're not the fucking clothes you wear. You're not the car you drive. You're not what's in your bank account sort of business. You know, I think he's talking about, you know, there's some people that just can't do it. It's kind of the same thing that he's been talking about, you know, for this whole episode about, like, you know, the weaker have to kind of rule over the weaker, and like the overman's kind of on top. This isn't like I don't think there's a racial component to this at all. What, like, when I see diversity, you know, like I've been through the ringer, you know, when you're in the army, you're like, this is the most diverse place in the world. You know, there's like everybody is there, you know, and you're like, okay, so when I'm with like a group of white dudes, I'm like, hey man, this is pretty diverse too, because I have a totally different experience than that other white guy. And that white guy has a totally different experience to every other white guy in the room. This is not a popular thing to talk about, but you can substitute the white guy parable in this to a black guy. You know, like, you can get a room full of black dudes in the room and they don't have the same life experience. They're just as diverse as everything else. So I think that this concept, you know, I mean, I'm just shooting myself in the foot, but this identity politics and all this stuff is a cancer on the world. And you can agree with me or not. That's fine. I'll still be your friend because that's the way that I roll. But also this idea that Zarathustra has here when he's talking about like how modern scholarship serves other powers such as democracy. And everyone's like, what? We live in a democracy. Like that's what it's all about. One man and one voice and power to the people. And you're like, actually, no. People like to bandy about the word democracy, but when it comes to like I've spent many hours reading the Federalist Papers, and the one thing that you get is that like democracy is bad. Like democracy is it's a mob rule. You know, hence the reason that there's an electoral college. And it's like the electoral college is weird because it's kind of like it's the lens in which we focus the one man, one vote. It's the way we focus the will of the people into what's correct. You know, I imagine that I could probably babble about this for quite a long time, but you know, this isn't a fucking civics podcast, you know. Well, it's not a philosophy podcast either, but what is to be said about this is the democracy is an awful idea, and all of the founders was like, this is bad. Like, we can't have a democracy. That's why it's a fucking representative republic. Maybe I should have did more work on the American sermon. On poets. While Zarathustra admires poets for their creativity, he complains that they try to appear deeper than they are. Ultimately, one finds old prejudices and assumptions at the bottom of their pretty writings, and Zarathustra also leaves us with a little warning, saying of poets, we lie too much. According to Plato, poets are a danger to the good society because they do not speak the truth, and because they turn their attention to the soul back to the body and the senses. Zarathustra acknowledges that he is a poet, and yet he also acknowledges that poets lie too much. Compare this with Nietzsche's reflections on the truth and lie. This speech begins with a conversation between Zarathustra and one of his disciples. As Zarathustra relates a lesson to this disciple, the disciple asks him if he previously said that the poets lie too much. Zarathustra feigns ignorance, saying that he does not remember saying such a thing. Zarathustra remembers and is actually laying a Socratic trap for his disciple. Zarathustra claims that he is a poet, and he asks the disciple if this means that he lies too much. And when Zarathustra asks the disciple what he believes, the disciple answers, I believe in Zarathustra. Zarathustra begins teaching about the nature of the poet. The poet, he says, is attentive to nature. The poet creates gods and worlds between heaven and earth, but these gods and worlds are simply lies that enslave men. In this way, Zarathustra is a poet because he weaves the poetry of the overman and the age to come. This teaching makes Zarathustra's disciple angry because he feels betrayed. Zarathustra looks inwards to reconcile his deep revelation of the overman with the super revelation of previous poets. Zarathustra is critical of poets and previous ages because they created the gods that have kept men from realizing the state of the overman. Zarathustra is also honest about the fact that he himself is a kind of poet, weaving tales of the overman, and he suggests the possibility that his poetry is all lies, just like the poetry of history. Zarathustra tells his disciple that though he is a kind of poet, he is not like any poet that came before him, because his teachings are deeper than theirs. While they created false worlds and gods, Zarathustra teaches a greater truth. I'm the best poet. There's never been a poet better than me. I'm the best. I'm a great poet. Tremendous. I'm a tremendous poet. On great events. Great events such as the invention of new values are hardly noticed. The state and the church make all sort of self-important notes. They have no real impact on things. The people take little notice of what Zarathustra has said and are more interested in a ghost of Zarathustra that flew by, crying out, "It is time, it is high time." On great events, a ship anchors at an island volcano and the sailors go ashore. And at noon, they see Zarathustra descending into hell, into the volcano, and Zarathustra returns some days later to tell them of this conversation with the fire hound concerning the sickness of the earth. Near the Blessed Isles, where Zarathustra has returned to his disciples, there is an island with a volcano that the locals believe is a gateway into the underworld. A ship of sailors stops on the island, and while they are on the island, they see a vision of Zarathustra flying over them, saying, "It's time, it's high time." The sailors are in awe of Zarathustra. They believe he is going off to hell. A rumor begins in the town that the devil has come for Zarathustra, and his disciples become worried. On the fifth day, however, Zarathustra returns and tells a story of the fire hound. The fire hound, he says, is a disease on the skin of the earth. Zarathustra goes to find out who this fire hound really is and where it comes from. He asked where it gets its nourishment and how it survives, and eventually he challenges this fire hound. The fire hound represents a rhetoric of revolution. Zarathustra claims that, like human beings, the revolution is a disease on the earth's skin. Even though it promises change and virtue, Zarathustra draws out the fire hound by challenging its teachings on revolution. This is important. Such thoughts do not bring about real change. Zarathustra charges because they are bound together with their ideologies. Real revolution is not about making the most noise. Zarathustra says it is about communicating the greatest ideas. Revolution is just as hypocritical as the state it purports to overthrow. As the speech ends, Zarathustra's disciples have barely listened to his story and the teaching within it because they are too excited to tell him about the sailor story and what Zarathustra's shadow said to them. And Zarathustra realizes that his myth is growing too large. He begins to wonder about the words and the shadows said to the sailors. We're just going to push through. We got two more, and then we're going to be current, bros. Fucking exciting. The Soothsayer. Zarathustra hears a soothsayer predicting a great future emptiness where we will feel incapable of creating anything new. So I've mentioned before, like on the regular episodes, not the lesson episodes, what I'm saying. And I'm like, Zarathustra, Nietzsche, through Zarathustra, was like a prophet of cancel culture. And to an extent, like modernity, right? Like how we are in our modern lives. So I'm just going to read this again, and I want you to think about Hollywood. In the media we consume every day. Zarathustra hears a soothsayer predicting a great future emptiness where we will feel incapable of creating anything new or even capable of dying out. And this prediction puts Zarathustra into a deep depression, during which he dreams that he is a watchman in a castle full of coffins. Suddenly, a wind comes and bursts the gates open, and a coffin bursts open full of laughter. One of Zarathustra's disciples interprets this dream as meaning that Zarathustra will awaken us from the gloom and the emptiness with his life and laughter. This passage represents Zarathustra confronted with the crisis of modernity. as he listens to the Soothsayers' doctrine. All is empty, all is the same, all has been. Zarathustra becomes sad and weary in this twilight, and he falls into a deep sleep while his disciples await his recovery. And when he awakens, Zarathustra relates a strange dream. And in the dream, it is midnight, and Zarathustra is a night watchman and a guardian of the tombs at the lonely castle of death. He is fumbling with the keys in the most creaking of all gates. A roaring wind tears open the gates, and a black coffin arises. And from out of this coffin burst 1,000-fold laughter. This passage is a prelude to On the Vision and the Riddle, which is the key to the whole drama of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Coming soon. The powerful dream is the disciples' attempt to interpret the dream, anticipates Freud's The Interruption of Dreams. This chapter begins without warning with a nightmare prophecy by a soothsayer. The soothsayer says, "I saw a great sadness descend over humanity. Everything is empty. Everything is the same. Everything was." Zarathustra awakens and realizes what the prophecy means. The long-awaited dark times of nihilism are approaching, and his teachings are in danger. Zarathustra realizes that the prophecy is true, and it makes him both weary and sad. When Zarathustra returns to his disciples, he tells them of another dream in which he is a watcher of graves, and asks for their interpretation. And the disciple who Zarathustra loves gives an interpretation that he hopes will cheer up his master. He tells Zarathustra that the dream means Zarathustra will laugh at those whose teachings and wisdom only sends others to their grave. And he says that Zarathustra awakened from the dream and came back to himself, so his enemies will awaken from their dreams and come to understand Zarathustra's teachings. For a moment, this makes Zarathustra feel better, and then he looks into the face of the disciple and sees that the interpretation is all wrong, and the prophecy of nihilism will come true. The disciple's interpretation is meant to make Zarathustra feel better. His disciple wants to show him how loyal he is to Zarathustra's teaching. But what Zarathustra begins to realize as the chapter ends is that the disciple has not been true to his teachings after all. This begins the closing chapters of the second part, in which Zarathustra again realizes that his disciples have disappointed him. Zarathustra realizes that he must leave them at some point. ... Again. ... The last one is the speech on redemption. I realize I'm long, bros. I realize it. Just hang tight. And we're going to be current, man. This is a great feat for the lessons episodes to be current with the actual Wednesday book club episodes. I'm very excited to be current. On redemption, Zarathustra complains that he has never yet found a complete human being, only inverse cripples who excel in one attribute but who are weak in everything else. And he could not bear to present the past if he could not look towards the future of the whole human beings that redeem this past. The trouble with the past is that we cannot change it. We will suffer because no matter how much we change and creation it may affect in the future, it cannot change the past. We come to see the suffering of the will as kind of punishment and see all life as suffering and punishment, and seek to cease trying to will anything in order to escape from this punishment. Zarathustra suggests that this pessimism results from seeing the past as an immovable thing that simply occurred without human influence. We can come to see the past as something that we willed. We can find redemption from our suffering and punishment. Another important prelude to On the Vision in the Riddle. Zarathustra crosses over a great bridge to find man in ruins. Verily, my friends, I will walk among men as among the fragments and limbs of men. This is what is terrible for my eyes, that I find man in ruins and scattered over a battlefield or a butcher field. Humanity lies in ruins because it is the spirit of revenge that has so far been a driving force behind the values of the past. The source of this revenge turns out to be the will's will against time, and it was. The key to overcoming the spirit of revenge turns out to have to do with time. Here it is revealed that the bridge to the overman requires overcoming the spirit of revenge. And this involves a confrontation with the problem of time and time's passing. One day, Zarathustra is walking across this large bridge where he is met by a group of cripples. They tell Zarathustra that though the people have started to believe in his teachings, they will not truly understand it until he is able to heal these crippled people. Zarathustra says that healing them would be the worst thing he could do. It would open up all kinds of cruelties of the world to them. Zarathustra refuses to become a miracle worker, which is a possibility that tempts him. Becoming a miracle worker might raise his profile in the eyes of the people, but ultimately it will hinder his true calling. As Zarathustra finishes crossing the bridge, he is met by a giant ear that he realizes is actually a hideously deformed person. Zarathustra practices his teachings regarding pity, treating these crippled people with a hard heart in order to teach them the true ways to approach the nature of the world. Zarathustra begins to teach his disciples. This chapter is the climax of part 2. In essence, it is a climatic part of the whole book. Zarathustra asks his disciple what they expect him to be: a poet, a truthful man, a liberator, or a tamer, a good man or an evil man. Zarathustra realizes that his true mission is to bring will to the people, yet he himself is not even advanced enough to break the will from its ultimate captor, which is time. Though will can liberate people, time that which claps even the liberator in chains. The will cannot go back and change time. It seeks to impose its power on time, but it is constrained by time. This, Zarathustra realizes, is the ultimate flaw in himself and his own power. I'm John. This has been the Ambercast.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review. On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode,
to hear the names of white men and others who, it was said, had also met or seen these creatures. She went after these persons too and found out that in due course that it was so, and they in turn had not been saying anything for fear of ridicule. I withhold their names too, as I do not have permission of any to publish them. Said human kids on reaching the age of reason turned out not to want to talk about this abomination, while their parents were most definitely did not and do not want to talk about it. Nonetheless, they have talked a bit, and I pass it on to you for what it is worth. We've made 5 investigation trips and have, for evidence, a fingerprint lifted off a house window, including a plaster cast of a footprint, personal taped accounts of the creature, plus many interviews. This includes photographs. He is 7 feet tall, 400 pounds. That's a big motherfucker. Can move at tremendous speeds, jump tremendous distances. No news items concerning this being have been printed in the Portland papers. He displays extreme cunning, walks and runs. Whoa, this is personal. He displays extreme cunning. He walks and runs erect. Appears frustrated. Acts as if he would like to communicate. He makes extremely high-pitched sounds. But if you want to stay till afterwards, I'll tell you I've never talked about this. I told my wife about it last night at a campfire while I was deciding what I was going to do with this episode. So I've never told any very literally a fraction, like maybe 3 other human beings, this story. But I'll tell you my fucking Bigfoot story if you hang on after this.
support the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
To the members of the degree of the Fulgar Correspondentia, alert. Due to a catastrophic, probably karmic, IT situation, the whole mailing list was deleted. If you would like to continue to access the infographics, the selected text versions of episodes, and exclusive art, I urge you to please re-sign up to the Fulgar Correspondentia immediately. I assure you that your email is safe and sound. It was just, accidentally deleted.